Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. We have it's really a historical fight, isn't it? Dmitrii Bivol against Artur Beterbiev, the fight that is going to determine the first undisputed champion in the so-called four-belt era. But there's just one problem with that statement. It's not actually true, because when you talk about undisputed champions, you're talking about someone who's got all the belts, we assume. I won't even get started on that whole lineal thing, because it's just do your head in. In actual fact, if you go back to the start of this century, Roy Jones Jr. Was at the time often referred to as an undisputed champion. He had the WBC, WBA, and IBF belts, which he accumulated during a totally dominant period at that particular weight, having dominated at super middleweight and also held a belt at middleweight. And he just cut a sway through everyone, made all his mandatories, was a very, very good champion. But he did not own the WBO belt. That was owned by Dariusz Michalczewski, who was based in Germany. And there was, if you're old enough to remember, there was a strong debate going on that Jones was ducking Michalczewski, which might seem a little ridiculous now, because we sort of hold Jones in a very high regard, and Michalczewski, although he's very popular in Germany, is not considered to be historically anywhere near Jones in terms of ability or historical significance or something. And part of it may be that Jones was American, Michalczewski wasn't. But he held that belt, that WBO belt, and in fact, he defended it many times in Germany. And Jones' attitude was, I'm not going to Germany. I can make a ton of money in America. And also he was very, very cautious of that, complete robbery at the Seoul Olympics, where I don't think he lost a sort of 10-second period of any round, but was deemed to be the loser. One of the most shameful, so obvious robberies, and I very rarely use the word robbery, but I'm going to on this occasion, one of the most shameful robberies in the history of the sport. And my God, there have been some bad ones. Certainly, in the last 40 years, I'm struggling to think of a worse decision. In fact, occasionally you'll get, obscure fights where one guy is so obviously robbed, but on such a big stage as that, an Olympic final, to see someone robbed. I mean, there's talk about boxing being kicked out of the Olympics right now. That's why Gennady Golovkin stepped in to try and, smooth things over and ensure that boxing does continue in the Olympics. But I'm surprised it wasn't kicked out following that, unbelievably bad decision, completely corrupt decision, when Jones got robbed. So he was reluctant to go to Germany to fight Michalczewski because of that. Because, he just thought, I'm not leaving America. I'm having things stacked in my favour now. And I suppose you can't really blame him. Michalczewski was a very good fighter, very effective. Would he have beaten Jones? I think it's extremely unlikely. People forget just how good Jones was when he was at his peak. And he, even though he wasn't really a light heavyweight, not really, he's more of a super middle, it's a small light heavy. He went all the way up to heavyweight, beat John Ruiz for the WBA belt, and was, an astonishing fighter. The best I have seen in my lifetime, and I'm in my late 50s, but a black mark over him because he did, like a lot of them, he did fail a PED test, and I'm not overlooking those things. But in terms of just ability, absolutely astounding, astonishing fighter. But was he the last undisputed champion? No, not really. Not if you include Michalczewski. He didn't hold all the belts. Now, at the time, the WBO was gaining gravitas. It was, rising in people's esteem. But it still hadn't really internationally taken off, and it hadn't become one of, as the phrase is always used, the big four. All right, it wasn't one of the big four. It was kind of like the IBO belt is now. And on Saturday, when either Beterbiev or Bivol is crowned undisputed champ, provided there's not a draw. No one's going to be that fussed if the IBO title isn't on the line. Actually, it might be on the line. To be honest, I think Bivol's got it. But if it wasn't on the line, people wouldn't be paying attention to it. Such was the case with when Jones held the 3 major belts, to use the vernacular of the time. So we need to be careful when we talk about undisputed champions. What does it mean? Let's say that the IBO does become considered internationally on a par with the others, just as the WBO has. I mean, are we now saying that a fighter must hold all 5 belts to be considered undisputed? I'm not saying yes or no. I mean, to be honest with you, I do think belts matter. I mean, I'd like to be able to sit here and say they don't, but I think they actually do, because if you've got someone walking around with a belt that's considered to be viable and they're saying they're a champion, unless it's a scenario like, say, Daniel Dubois, who's picked up the IBF belt and then defended it against Joshua. Meanwhile, you've got Usyk walking around, and he was the one that threw the belt away. Then you can sort of make a case, well, Usyk is the last man standing. He's also knocked out Dubois, a year or so ago. But unless you've got a scenario like that, and you've got someone walking around with a belt that holds some sort of weight, you're going to be difficult to call yourself undisputed. You might be considered the best, but you've got to be undisputed. You're going to have to beat that person. Unless it is a belt you've given up. But this is food for thought when it comes to, the whole subject of undisputed. What constitutes undisputed? Do you agree with me or do you agree with the opinion, the concept that you've got to hold all the belts? I don't know. It's a debate that's going to rage, isn't it? What about the WBF belt? If you hold one of the WBA's regular titles, are you a world champion? I don't think so. I don't think the WBF belt matters. I don't think the WBU belt mattered in the 90s or the early 2000s. Even though Frank Warren, when he had Ricky Hatton, had him defending it every 5 minutes. I don't think those things matter. But to be undisputed, what constitutes being undisputed? Leave your opinions below. I want to read them. And let me know why you think whatever you think. And please subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit the like button, because you're helping the channel build up Joe Stunner Boxing. It makes sense. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'll get you later. Bye for now.